ready for you.
Sure.
And also to all the students who are with us today and anyone else, if you have a question, just put it into the general chat box and we'll look over your question and we'll ask it to him towards the end of the event. Okay, so our first question is, tell us about your specific personal finances journey.
Yeah. So like I kind of alluded to, my journey was like filled with a lot of mistakes. And so, I'll go into specifics. So I went to college, I went to medical school, both private. I went to Emory and then University of Rochester, and I paid for every cent of it with loans. I got maybe a few scholarships and that kind of thing, but it was largely funded completely by loans. And then I had 7 years of training. And again, I was totally financially clueless. I sort of just stuck my head in the sand and said, this will all sort itself out later, and I'm not in it for the money. And, that stuff's not important, which is not true. It's true that I'm not in it for the money, but it's not true that that stuff isn't important. But so through all 7 years, I deferred my loans. I spent up to my paycheck, which in the beginning was something that I didn't have to do. It was just my wife and I living in New York City. Eventually we had 2 kids, and then it sort of became that we were spending up to our paycheck, but more so because we were buying a lot of diapers and daycare and things like that. I took out credit. I did kind of all the things that you shouldn't do. And like I said, kind of at the end, it all was catching up, and it was to a point where I realized this just wasn't going to take care of itself, and I had to take control of things, and I had to get my finances on track, because if I didn't, then I was going to spend more time worrying about that. And, I realized my financial well-being was like really poor, and it was having an effect on my overall well-being. And so I did that. Like I said, I took months, and I'm still learning every day, but I learned as much as I could, reading books and blogs and podcasts and things like that. I created a financial plan with my wife, and just taking those steps, I wasn't making a cent more money at the time, but just taking those steps and basically having a plan just made me feel like so much better and better able to concentrate on being a doctor. And then transitioning now to becoming an attending, which, you guys will experience soon enough, your income increases hundreds and hundreds fold. It's like nothing else. It's basically like winning the lottery. And there's so many pitfalls that can come with that, especially when you're carrying like over $400,000 of debt, like I was. And you're making choices like where to live, how to spend your money. Lifestyle creep becomes like a huge factor. So I was very fortunate to sort of establish a plan before those things happened, so that going into it, I was able to manage where, we're saving 41% of our income. We're still able to live like super comfortably, obviously. But we're saving 41%, and a third of that we're using to pay off debt really aggressively. A third of that's going to our sort of traditional retirement investing. And then a third of it we use for real estate investing. And like I said, I've just been trying to continue to learn as much as possible. I'm very much, like I said, still on this journey. That's what I try to share is like, I'm not someone that's already reached it and sort of looking back with rose-colored glasses. I'm very much in it, like on a daily basis, still getting to a point of reaching financial well-being. So that's sort of where it stands today.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So our next question is, so you've kind of already alluded to why you believe personal finances are important for you.
Mm-hmm.
Could you maybe talk about why you would think personal finances is important for medical students in general?
Yeah, no, that's a really important question. And I definitely, when I was a medical student, I can remember thinking back now, like hearing people sort of talk about it, or even just sort of talking about like, oh, we should be careful what we spend our money on because our loans are going to add up and that kind of stuff. And I sort of just like thought like, well, that's just a problem for future Jordan. And I can tell you that now that I am future Jordan, I wish I had, thought about it a little bit more. So it definitely is important. And I'll preface before I go more in depth in saying like in medical school, in residency, definitely your primary focus is on becoming the best doctor you can. 100%. That is, your primary focus, and you should never regret that. But this is something that you want to just kind of have some basic understanding of and some basic kind of guidelines, so that you don't end up like I was at the end of training, which with just a ton of debt and everything like that, and that you sort of have a plan earlier on. And it's like I said, it helps you become a better doctor, because you're able to focus on why you went into medicine in the first place. And you guys aren't in this position necessarily yet, but you'll see once you start clinical rotations, and especially once you become residents, and you'll see happy attendings, and you'll see not so happy attendings. And more often than not, the not so happy attendings are the ones that are having to work extra hard, or have sort of become disillusioned with medicine because they find that they're having to practice in a way that they don't want to, in order to support themselves and their family. And when you can think about becoming financially free in the sense of you are working because you want to rather than because you have to, then you can start to practice medicine on your terms, and you're doing it for the reasons that you got into it. You're not focusing on, oh, how many RVUs, or relative value units, is this procedure I'm doing generating, or what kind of insurance does this patient have, or am I going to need to extend my clinic hours, or work, add that fourth OR case on because I need to meet my quota, or I need to reach a bonus or something like that. And it all does start in medical school. And I think the most important thing you can do in medical school, a lot of this was in the article that Mike wrote for my blog, but just like starting to learn about finances. So you guys are obviously doing that just by being here. And that's such a huge step. If you even just like pick up a book, like the White Coat Investor book is an awesome one. It's very basic. It's like 150 pages or something. You could read it in a week, just to get a basic understanding of things. Or even if you just decide to follow one blog and just read a couple posts a week, whether it's mine or anyone else's, you'll be amazed by the end of your medical school, you'll be more financially literate than 100% the majority of your attendings, let alone residents. So that's a huge thing you can do. And then I think just being cognizant of your loans, if you have any. If you don't, then that's fantastic. But probably most of you do. And so just learning about those, like, again, I totally did not understand anything about them. And it led me to make like big mistakes. Like I said, by deferring all of my loans. For instance, my residency and training is, one of the longest that you can have. It was 7 years. And during that time, I could have been paying very minimum payments on my loans for the PSLF loan forgiveness program, which requires you to pay for 10 years and then the rest of your loans are forgiven. So I could have put 7 years towards that in my residency, but I didn't. And now that I'm an attending, the payments that I would have to make are much, much larger, and I would have to do that for 10 years. So any sort of forgiveness would be minimal or probably non-existent. So that's simply just because I didn't inform myself enough as a medical student. And it could have been just as simple as going and meeting with a loan officer or whoever at your medical school and sort of just saying, like, tell me about these loans. What types of loans do I have? What can I do with them when I reach residency? What can I do with them? Just getting very basic information. You don't need to learn every sort of fine print point of the loan. You just sort of want to understand the basics. And then I think just developing like some very, very simple financial habits. Like, as a medical student, obviously you're not making any money, you're spending money, but you want to try to save a little bit every month to put towards saving or investing. And that's just because that's a practice that then you'll carry on. And when you do start making a lot more money, you're just going to be like used to doing it. It's just going to be second nature to you. And the 20% you save, instead of being like, $100 a month, is going to be like thousands and thousands of dollars a month. And then that's really going to set yourself up for, financial success. So I think those are some main things, especially as a medical student, that I wish I did and that I think is important to at least think about.
Okay, great. Thank you. So kind of answered a little bit about what our next question was. The next question was, what would you recommend to a medical student who really doesn't know where to start?
Yeah.
So yeah, but you kind of answered that. So we're going to move on to the next part.
Sure.
So, we know you're not an advisor. You're a plastic surgeon.
Yeah.
We want to focus on the background. But I'm sure that there is some advice that you can offer, just some things from your personal experience. So
Mm.
starting, what is some advice for medical students to start for with loans?
Yeah.
About loans, student loans?
Yeah. So I think in general, you want to take out as little amount of loans as you can. Obviously, that sounds really simple, but it's not always that way. And I've even talked to people who are like, well, should I just take out more because I want to live in like this apartment and then, I'll just sort of take care of it later. And, you don't want to deprive yourself, but you want to take out the minimal amount that you can. And then, like I said, you want to learn about them. It's probably going to be pretty hard in medical school to obviously start paying them off. I don't know that I know of anyone that's been able to do that. But by just keeping them as small as possible, then you can kind of go into residency and begin to start paying them off. And that'll make a big difference. And I calculated, and it's a very overly simplistic calculation, but like for every dollar that I would have put towards my loans as like an intern, that would have turned out to like $8 in the future. So that's like a ton. So basically, like if I didn't just order out one night or something, like I mean, you guys probably know, like New York City, even ordering for one person, you can't get it for less than like $20 after the tip. That's like $160. So again, it doesn't mean I would have never ordered out, but maybe like if I was just feeling super lazy or something one night, I would have just been like, oh, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And the more you can do that, those things do add up, as small as they kind of seem now. So that's really the main thing kind of in medical school, is learn about the loans, keep them as small as you possibly can. And then once you get to the residency, I think trying to pay off even just as little as you can, even if it's just like $100 a month, whatever, just to get rid of some of that interest, that's important. And then starting to think about if you're going to pursue loan forgiveness. Those are kind of the main things.
Okay, great. Thank you. So next would be budgeting. What sort of advice do you have about budgeting for medical students?
Yeah, I love budgeting. I know I always talk about that and people make fun of me. But I didn't really start budgeting until like very recently, again, because, I just wasn't very financially savvy. But, a lot of people kind of look at budgeting as like very restrictive. And it's certainly, I think, as a medical student or resident, there's kind of more of a tendency to see it that way because you're not making as much. And so it does really seem like you're restricting yourself. But the truth of the matter is, whether you have a budget or not, you're going to have to restrict yourself because you're on, some finite income. But what I do for budgeting is pretty simple. Is I have a template, and you can find it on my blog as well. There's a post, I think it's called like Budgeting Made Simple, something along those lines. And there's a free download of this template, but it's basically an Excel sheet, and it just lists like all of my needs and wants. And so what you could do is very easily just download that template and just go through, and you can edit it and amend it for your situation. So needs are things like groceries, paying rent, things like that. And wants are like entertainment budget, maybe like gym membership, things like that. And then just with that Excel, you then just go through like your bank statement for the past month, and you just go through every expense, and you're just going to categorize it as one of those categories: a need, a want, wherever it fits in. So like if you spent $50 going out to eat at a restaurant, that goes in like the eating out category. If you spent I'm just making numbers up, but like $100 on a gym membership, that goes towards that, whatever. And then you're just going to tally it up for each category, see what you spent for that month, and then tally it up for the whole month. And hopefully you'll come in, under what your income was for that month, or at least equal to it. But once you do that, then you can sort of get a sense of like how much you have been spending in each area, and then how much you need to spend in each area to reach your financial goals, which, let's say that's even just as modest as saving $100 a month to put towards investing. Then you can adjust things as needed. And then just once a month, you just sit and do the same thing. You have your budget there. You just open up your bank statement, and you go through and just tabulate each expense and categorize it. and then total it up and see how you did compared to what you were shooting for. And, then adjust as needed. But something that takes it's definitely more complicated, I'm sure, for me now than for you guys as medical students, just because it's with me and my wife, and we have 2 kids, and we probably have a lot more categories than you necessarily will have. It only takes us 20 minutes to go through. We just did it a couple of days ago on November 1st. So I think it's something that's really simple, an easy way to do it. And it just sort of gives you a framework of your spending, and if it's sort of in line with your goals of how you want to be saving or using your money. And again, it's something that will just create a really good habit, if nothing else, for when you do become, because again, even as becoming a resident, you're going to see your salary, you're going to make a salary, period, which is a huge change. And then when you become an attending for sure, and you see that salary go way up, it's going to keep you honest in the sense of making sure that you're not overspending in one area compared to another, and you're reaching your financial goals.
Okay, thank you. And the budgeting templates and strategies that Dr. Frey is talking about, it's all on his website, prudentplasticsurgeon.com. So I put the link in the general chat box for everyone to see. Okay, and for the next question, this is more within reach to medical students. Could you tell us a little bit about what someone should do to educate themselves on personal finances? For example, podcasts, books, things like that, mentors.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tell you exactly what I did was the book that I started with was The White Coat Investor. And that's a great book. There's a whole chapter and section for medical students. So that's a great place to start. And then what I did is I just got that and I just read 10 pages a day. And it's 150 pages or something. So it takes 2 weeks, but you'll find, I'm sure you're going to read it faster than that. But I always just sort of set that as my very modest goal, because it can seem overwhelming to start with this subject, especially. So I think just saying okay, I'm going to get this and I'm going to really ease into it, because you don't want to overwhelm yourself. But that's a great book. The other books I read were The Millionaire Next Door, which is basically a book. It's by Thomas Staley. It's from the 90s, but they basically did a bunch of studies of America's millionaires and who they are. And it's not what you expect. It's not people driving, Ferraris and living in huge mansions and stuff. It's there's some pretty funny findings. The most common cars that a millionaire drove, and again, this was the 90s, but was a Ford Explorer, and the most common watch is a Timex. So it's more of a philosophical book to sort of set you thinking about what it really means to be wealthy versus, maybe being rich, which they sort of equate to more the display of wealth without actually having it. So I think there's some quote from a Texan that's they call it big hat, no cattle, versus I guess having cattle and not caring about your hat. So that's a great book. Another one that's really a simple read, and it's more sort of talks about investing strategies, especially in the stock market, but that's a Coffee House Investor. So those 3 books are really good ones to start with. In terms of the blogs that I follow, and I still follow them today, and every morning I read The White Coat Investor, Physician on Fire, and The Physician Philosopher. And again, it's that's not a huge task to read those every morning. It just takes 5 to 10 minutes. And I'll just do it either, when I wake up, or if I'm in between cases in the morning or something like that. And basically what I told myself while I was still a resident is I'm going to read 1 post a day. And then, before I knew it, after a few weeks or a month, I was pretty well educated, because you kind of can't help it. So again, just set sort of modest goals for yourself as you're getting into this, because it can seem really overwhelming going into it. And then if you just try to dive in headfirst to the deep end, it's going to continue to seem so overwhelming, and then that can lead to sort of giving up. So just start very modestly, start a little bit at a time. Like I said, your focus still 100% should be on your studies, but this is just kind of something that is a little side interest. And I think you'll find that it is exciting, and that it is interesting.
Okay, great. Thank you. Um, is there any, wait, let's see. Yeah. So books, podcasts, that's amazing. How about mentorship? Where do you think students should look for mentorship, and how do you think they could start looking for mentorship related to personal finances, whether it's in medical school or residency or after that?
Yeah, it's always a tough one because this is still sort of like I don't want to say taboo, but almost sort of like taboo issue in medicine of like, people kind of tend to think like, oh, we're doctors, we didn't get into it for the money. And again, that's like a misconception because thinking about money or making sure that you are working towards financial well-being, that's not like being obsessed with money or something like that, or just trying to be a doctor to make money, which obviously is not why we went into it. And a lot of times it's people that lack financial well-being themselves that sort of take this sort of mindset or approach because it's something that they feel that they've left behind, and then seeing someone who's sort of more on top of it, that can be sort of I don't know, threatening or not a good feeling. So you kind of have to go about searching for people that are understanding of where you're coming from. And it's probably not the majority of people that you're going to encounter in medical school or residency or attending hood or whatever it is. So I think it's a tough thing, and there's not a real direct answer, but you kind of have to feel it out. Like, definitely don't go like, your first surgery rotation and go in the OR and then start trying to ask the attending surgeon, like how do you save for retirement or something like that, because you're not going to get a favorable response there. But, as you get to know, the residents that you're around more, the attendings that you're around more, it may be something that they bring up like, oh, I have to start figuring out my loans. And you could say, oh, tell me about that. How have you dealt with that? I know it's something I'm thinking of. And you'll kind of find people that have a similar mindset, or maybe thinking about things a little more deeply than others. But you also have to be careful, like picking and choosing what advice to take, because there's a lot of people who they may be very willing to talk to you about finance, but then they're like investing all of their money with a financial advisor that's using like loaded funds or is day trading, and they're paying like a ton in fees and taxes and things that, I generally don't advise. Or, they may go like, oh, real estate investing, you should never get into real estate investing, because they sort of did so on a whim without being educated and lost a bunch of money. And that obviously is, informing their view of it, which is not really the view of someone who goes about it with a plan that's educated. So it's kind of a roundabout answer, but you sort of just have to feel it out. And there are people there. I think, as you sort of, a lot of the mentorship you may find initially is, online and sort of these like blogs and forums and things like that. And then slowly you'll sort of find like-minded people as you go along.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also I agree with you. I think it's very important to approach finding mentors very conservatively, because
Yeah. Yeah.
come off as someone who, is setting boundaries.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Just give me a second.
Yeah, no problem.
So, what are some important pearls or takeaways that the medical students here can learn today for medical school, moving into residency, and to attending hood after that? What are sort of some words of wisdom, pieces of advice, specific things that you think that they should look into? What are those things that you think you can offer to them today?
Yeah, I think first starting completely outside of finance, like just, enjoy, despite all of these things. And obviously, doctors and medicine in general is sort of in a difficult period, and you're taking on loans, and people are talking about how reimbursement and things for physician is decreasing, and there's all of these struggles for physicians. But, try to recognize and appreciate the opportunity you have. And, it's such a great thing to be able to care for patients and to be able to change their lives. And you want to start thinking about what it is that you want to do that'll fulfill you, because as a physician, regardless of what you choose, there is a pathway to, like I said, financial well-being. And, it doesn't matter if you're going to become a pediatrician or a plastic surgeon or whatever you're going to do. You want to think about what's going to bring you fulfillment and what you're going to enjoy for your life. Because again, if you're doing something because you feel like you have to and not because you enjoy it and you want to, you're not going to be happy no matter, what your net worth is, or if you've paid off all your loans or whatever you're doing. So really spend a lot of time, thinking about that as you go through your courses. What do you enjoy as you go through your clerkships and things like that? And especially that's going to help you like matching into the programs that you want to for residency and things like that, because people can tell authenticity and, people are genuinely interested and are passionate, and that comes off. And those are the people that they're going to want, more so than, even where they came from and stuff like that. Like I always tell the story, I ended up at NYU plastic surgery, which is a big program, and I was very proud to go there, and it's well respected. But coming out, like I was someone, I had, I had decent board scores, and I hadn't researched much. I didn't have a single publication, all of these things. Like there are other people that are much more qualified than me, but I just went and did a sub-I and loved it. And that passion and that stuff came across, and that's why they ended up matching me. It wasn't so much, all of those other external things that a lot of times people can worry about. So that's sort of like, in general, not financial related. If you're looking for more financial related, I honestly, if there's one thing you can take away, it's just, like I said, just start a little bit your education as medical students. Just start that seed, because that's going to grow so much, throughout your training and stuff. And by the time you become an attending, and you're going to be so well prepared for these things that most of us weren't or aren't. So even if that's just like, start following a blog and reading a post every once in a while, or picking up a book and reading a few pages a day. I think that's probably the most important thing.
Okay, thank you. So those were the collection of questions that we had prepared for you. So now we're moving on to some of the questions that the audience has given us.
Sure.
So Logan and Greg have asked 2 questions. We're going to put it into one.
Okay.
So when do you start looking into retirement accounts? And could you talk a little bit about your retirement accounts?
Yeah. So it's never too early. As medical students, you don't necessarily have like access to like 401ks and that kind of thing, but you will as residents. So certainly as residents, I would say when you join whatever residency, meet with an HR person, or, on your orientation, there should be something where they talk about it. But there are like tax deferred and tax-free accounts that you can invest into. And especially when you're a resident, you're in like a much lower income bracket than you will be at another time in your life. So investing in like a Roth version of your retirement account, which is generally offered, that just means a Roth means that your contributions are taxed now rather than later. And that again is advantageous as a resident or trainee, just because you're again in such a low tax bracket compared to what you will be later in your life. But guy, it's pretty embarrassing. I had like, how much was it? I had a Roth 457 account through residency, which I didn't even know about. And I found out about because I was like going through papers as I was getting ready to move from New York City to Buffalo. And I found like a paper for this account, and I logged in and I saw I had like $28,000 in there just from contributing like a little bit in my first 3 years of residency. So if I'd continued doing that, it would be even more. So definitely when you start residency, look into that. But as medical students, you can, if you have the money, you can contribute to individual retirement accounts or IRAs. And the one you probably want to, again, is a Roth IRA. And you can contribute up to $6,000 a year. And, you can just do that by opening an account at any brokerage. Like I use Vanguard, but there's Fidelity or all other ones. Vanguard and Fidelity are generally the best though. And you would just open that and say you wanted to start a Roth IRA, and you would contribute money to it. And again, that money would be taxed now compared to later, which is an advantage for you because you would be putting money now in a very low tax bracket. And then for the rest of your life, it would grow tax-free. And when you take it out, it would be tax-free. So imagine, I mean, you guys are all super young. Imagine putting in some money now and then, 20, 30 years, how much that'll have grown into just by investing in like index funds passively. That's an awesome option for you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Zaid asks, do you recommend having an accountant, and when?
Okay. Is that, Zane, I don't know if you're there. Do you mean like a financial advisor or like a CPA or?
Sorry. Yeah, like like a personal accountant, I guess, someone who just handles your finances.
Yeah. So like a money man or woman. That's what.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't. I'll preface it in saying, I don't think you need one. I don't use one. I don't plan on using one at any point in my life. I did have one in residency, again, just because I didn't know what I was doing. And my parents were like, oh, we have this guy and you have this little bit of money and you should put it with him. It just so happened that he was like a very honest, good advisor, because I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. But in general, you don't need to. And to go into the how of that is too much for right now. But like I said, in 3 months, I went from knowing absolutely nothing to managing all of my own finances. And it's because it's actually really simple. We think the stock market is super confusing. And probably there are some of you on this that like know even more about the stock market than me, but I truly believe in just passive investing with index funds, which are basically mutual funds that mirror an index. And that's all you have to do is you just buy them, and you're not going to need the money for like 10, 20, 30 years. So you're not worried about short-term volatility of the stock market. So you don't care like what happens after the election, if it goes up or down, because over the long term, the stock market is always going up. So that's what I do is I just invest in index funds, and once a year I rebalance them. And then that's the only time I pay attention to them. And there's a ton of blog posts on my blog. I'd encourage you to go and check those out, on stock market investing and rebalancing and what all of that means. But it's all like surprisingly simple stuff that, at the beginning, I would never believe that I can manage my money. And, I definitely can. And I guarantee that you guys are probably a lot smarter than me, so you can too.
Thank you. So Greg asks about doctors' mortgages. Are they worth it?
Yeah. So I again have posts. So one of my posts is, should you buy or rent your first house? And the conclusion is that you should rent it. But what I did was I bought my first house because, of course, I didn't follow my own advice. But there was unique, situations for why that was, and the post goes into all that. But so just very basics, because again, I know when I was a medical student, I didn't understand any of this, and probably you guys do because you're a lot smarter than me. But a mortgage is a loan. It's a loan the bank gives you to buy a house, and usually there's a down payment that you have to put on that loan. And it varies. There's some for first-time home buyers, it can be as low as 3.5%, but usually it's more in like the 20 to 25% range. So you can imagine you have a doctor who's just finishing residency and has delayed gratification for like 4 years of medical school and at least 4 years of residency, and wants to buy a house, but they don't have a lot of money saved up to make a down payment. Well, banks aren't stupid, so they realize like this is someone that is going to make a lot of money, and that we can, make a lot of money off of by giving them a mortgage. So they came up with physician loans, which are basically a mortgage that requires very little to no down payment. And So like banks will give you, like when I graduated, I was like, how much house can I buy? And the first person I asked was the mortgage broker, which like is really stupid because they're going to tell you like, oh, you can millions of dollars, like we're willing to give you a mortgage for millions of dollars. That's not like a smart thing. The bank is not going to tell you what you should do that's financially smart. They're just going to tell you like how much they're willing to give you. So you have to be careful, but it can be worth it in some situations. And so like in my instance, why we did buy with a doctor mortgage is because we had a very specific criteria of what we were looking for in a house. We had a cap of how much we were looking to spend, which was much less than the recommended 2 times of our income. Like our houses, the purchase price was equal to 1.2 times our income. It's generally advised to keep it under 2 times your income. Also, I was moving to a place that I knew I would be for a long time because it was home for me, and we had vetted both of our jobs extensively. Because that's the biggest thing. If you move somewhere and buy a house and then you don't like your job, or like you end up switching residencies or something like that, and then you have to sell that house again in a year, you're going to lose money no matter what. Even if you're lucky enough and the market got hot and your property appreciated, which is like, that's not a guarantee. That's not any way that you should invest in real estate by just hoping that the market goes up, because that's gambling. But even if it did, just by the transaction costs alone, you're going to lose money. So you want to make sure you're somewhere for a long time. But we knew we were going to be here for a long time. We had set criteria, and by getting a doctor's mortgage that required 0% down, the money that we were going to use for a down payment, we just used instead to buy investment property. So it wasn't like we used that money to buy like, a super fancy car, or like, spent it in some other way. We used it for an investment that's already paying us back money in our pocket. So that's kind of a long-winded answer. There are reasons to use it, but most of the time, you're probably not going to want to. And I'll say specifically for, when you're in residency, my general recommendation would be to rent. The only situation that I would say maybe you consider actually buying a house is if you're going to do something like house hack or turn it into an investment property after you leave residency. But you have to go into that like really prepared and doing your due diligence on that property to make sure that's actually a good investment property, not just like buying a house that you like and then you just say, oh yeah, I'll just rent it out when I leave. Because if you're not actually having a good house that is one that's attractive to rent, or that's going to cash flow to rent, then you're just going to end up paying 2 mortgages. So for the most part in residency, definitely rent. Once you reach attending, you just want to really think about renting versus buying. And initially, probably renting is the more generalizable advice, but sometimes buying can be the way to go.
Great.
Thank you.
So Ale, who's part of our board, you asked if he has time to pick stocks while he's working. You heard the short answer. It's no.
No. Yeah. I don't believe in picking stocks. But I know people do it. And my brother-in-law drives me crazy because he does it despite me telling him all the time why I don't think it's worth it. But like, for those of you who are not familiar, like there's a lot of research showing that people who try to actively manage their stock portfolios, they do worse than the average 80% of the time. And these are like people on Wall Street who have like all day and fancy computers to like analyze all this stuff, not like me or, you guys. So that's why I believe in just like passive index fund investing. If you want to like the excitement of picking stocks or like day trading or things like that, then maybe just take like a small percent of your money that you're investing, like 5 or 10%, and do it with that. But really, like, I don't know, you can find other exciting stuff to do with your time, and then just keep your money invested passively and just, watch it grow.
Okay. So we have Motion Latanov asks, can you talk about your experience with contract negotiating? What should we expect? And do you have any tips for those who are coming out of residency?
Yeah. So contract negotiation is obviously a big one. And it's kind of crazy because like you go from medical school and residency, which are these like really defined pathways, to all of a sudden it's like the open market and you're negotiating a contract and you have no idea what the hell you're doing. So again, I have a whole blog post on this, but I'll kind of hit on the main points. I think the most important thing is like you have to learn and you have to know your value, because we come out and we have no idea how much we're actually worth, but the people that we're negotiating with, they 100% know what we're worth. They have like, you know, algorithms and stuff, and they have experience so they know what we're worth and we don't. And so they have all the advantage in negotiating. And the reason that is because physicians are like so cagey about talking about what they're making. So what I ended up doing was I just asked a bunch of people like what they made. And I absolutely did so in a really like respectful way and not just like blurting it out to them or something like that. But, you know, they were, for the most part, happy to tell me. I even asked people at the prospective jobs that I was looking at, like that were 5-10 years out. I said, well, you know, how much are you making now compared to what you started out as? So I knew what the trajectory was kind of like. I knew what they started as. And so I sort of had an idea of what I was looking at. And so because of that, I think I got a deal that was a lot better than most people. And so it's really not wrong to do that, again, in sort of a tactful manner, obviously. And then other aspects, you just want to start thinking about, the same way I said, you want to start thinking about what specialty you want to go into, and you really want to focus on what's going to make you happy and what's going to make you fulfilled. You want to think about a practice like that as well. Like there's so many, you know, for so long, I thought I was going to be at just a really traditional academic kind of place. Like for a long time, I just planned to stay at NYU. That was the plan for years. But, you know, I sort of realized eventually that wasn't what made me happy. You know, I didn't want to have to, you know, fight and scrape just to get the cases that I wanted. I didn't want to have to take an immense amount of call to try and build up my practice. And, you know, I wanted to live in a place where I could, you know, my money would go further. And I ended up finding a practice that's like absolutely perfect for me, with minimal call responsibility, like awesome partners. We use a co-surgeon model. For anyone who's not familiar with microsurgery, it's really fun cases. You're like taking tissue from one area in the body and moving it somewhere else, and then hooking up blood vessels. They're like 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters in size using the microscope, but they're really tedious cases. They can take like hours and hours and up to 12 hours more. So, you know, if you're doing that by yourself, it's kind of painful and it takes a lot of the joy out of it. So I found a practice that uses a co-surgeon model, where basically we have 2 attending surgeons on every case, and they're super experienced in microsurgery like myself. So we're able to do these cases a lot quicker than most places, and it makes it like a lot more enjoyable. So you just want to think about, you know, what you want out of a practice first, and then find a practice to match that. Whereas most people kind of go about it the other way. They like look at the practices out there and then try to like fit their square peg into a round hole. So those are kind of the general thoughts.
Okay. Since our medical students are very busy, we only have about 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
So we got to speed it up a little bit. So to follow up the previous question, the same person who asked the question, it caught their attention. What does RVU mean? You mentioned it before.
Yeah, RVU is relative value unit. So it's kind of the way most places are going in terms of reimbursement. So like for me, for instance, each procedure I do, let's say I do a breast reconstruction with a free flap using microsurgery, that procedure will be assigned a certain number of RVUs. Let's just arbitrarily say it's 50. And then my hospital will say, okay, a plastic surgeon makes a certain dollar amount per RVU. The average in the country is $65 per RVU, but your hospital may be more or less, or your insurance that you bill may be more or less. So if it's 50 RVUs and it's $65 an RVU, you can do that math and figure out how much you get paid for that case. Or other places will say, like, you have to do 5,000 RVUs this year to get paid your salary. And for every RVU you do above that, you keep 40% of the RVU value. So that's the way that a lot of places are going. That's, for me, for most places that I interviewed, that was the model. My model is not that. Just because I didn't want it to be that way, because I didn't want to constantly feel again like I was chasing that. I wanted to be able to focus more on just practicing the way I wanted to. But that's what RVU means.
Okay, great. So Ale asks, do 401ks have matching once you're in attending?
Yeah, it varies job by job, but most do. Yeah, that's the simple answer. Most do.
Okay. And we have one more question by David. David Yusuf, can you ask your question? Because I don't fully understand what you texted me.
Sure. My question is, based on your strategy, how do you choose which which asset classes to invest in? Meaning, like, what's your risk tolerance, right, on an attending salary?
Yeah, good question. So again, I'll refer you in my blog. There's a post where it talks about my actual asset allocation. You can see like what it exactly is and what my whole entire financial plan is. But the way I chose, like the starting point that people recommend is sort of like you're going to split between stocks and bonds. Stocks are riskier but have expected higher return for that risk, and bonds are less risk and less expected returns for that risk. So the more stocks you have in a profile or a portfolio, the more quote unquote risky it is, or the higher your risk tolerance, and the more bonds, the more conservative it is. So like a rule of thumb is your age, it rounded to the nearest 10, is the percentage of bonds that you should have. So I'm 33 now, so that would mean 30% bonds, but I actually only have, what do I have? See, now I'm forgetting because I haven't even looked, but I think I have 10 or 15% bonds. Because again, I'm still young, and I know like that I'm not gonna, the money I'm investing, I'm not gonna need for 10, 20, 30 years. So I don't care as much again about the volatility of it in the short term. So I have a more risky portfolio or a higher risk tolerance, and that's going to vary by everyone. But as I get closer to retirement, I'll shift that more towards bonds, just because at that point I won't want the short-term volatility. I want to know that I just have my money sitting there so that I can take it out when I want it. So that's kind of just really simply how I determined it. But you guys are super young. Again, everyone's going to be different. But having like an 80% stock or 90% stock portfolio, because you guys have a long investing career ahead of you, that's probably, if I were you, where I would be. But again, just tailor it to yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And our last question for today's event, do you have any tips on handling and building credit as a medical student?
Yeah, I think just, the biggest thing is like minimizing the amount of credit that you use. That's like the biggest thing in credit score is like your percent utilization. So if you're like maxing out your credit cards, you're not going to have a great credit score. And also obviously paying them on time. And that stuff will come into play like, really the first time your credit score will really come into play is kind of like if you're buying a house for the first time. And I can honestly even tell you, like, my credit score was really crappy when I was first buying a house, but the banks don't care because they just care about how much money you're making. So, I would say that that's really it. Just manage how much credit you use, try to minimize the credit you take out, obviously.
All right, so I think that wraps it up. Thank you, Dr. Frey, for taking time to speak to medical students today.
Yeah.
I'm sure all of us enjoyed it and learned a lot.
It was great.
Sorry?
It was great. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity to come. Definitely, you can reach me anytime. Just email. My email is prudentplasticsurgeon@gmail.com. More than welcome to email me. I also wanted to mention, so it hasn't come out yet, but probably in the next few months it will. I'm putting together an online course that basically is just going to go over like everything you need to know transitioning from being a medical student / trainee to attending. So, I won't necessarily remember all your names or something, but when that does come out, if you just email me, if you are interested in it, I'll give it to you for like a huge discount. It's going to be, very cheap to begin with. So it's accessible, but especially for you guys as medical students for being here, just let me know and I'll make sure that that's available to you.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm putting your email into the chat box. Danielle, could you offer some words about the recording?
Yes. So thank you again, Dr. Frey, for having us, for coming.
Yeah.
So all our events are recorded. We will send out this recording to everybody who's signed into our list server. And you could take a look at it again. Follow us on Instagram. We'll post a little bit about our future events. And thank you for coming.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you all so much.
So I'm putting all the information into the chat box. That's Dr. Jordan Frey's website, his email, his Instagram, and we're also putting the Instagram for Business and Medicine Organization. So follow us and look out for our next event.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Take care.